The morning of September 12, 1942, at Charter Towers Airfield in Queensland, Australia, the heat shimmered in waves off the tarmac. A Douglas A-20 Havoc light bomber rumbled forward, taxiing toward a makeshift hangar built from corrugated tin and sheer determination. Inside, a 43-year-old man with grease-stained hands and a fire in his eyes was about to change the course of the Pacific War. His name was Paul Irvin Gunn, though everyone called him Pappy. In just 6 hours, the aircraft he had painstakingly modified would strike a Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. If his innovations worked, American bombers would finally have the power to tear through Japanese shipping and ground installations. If they failed, men would die, and Pappy Gunn would be remembered as the fool who wasted precious time and resources on a reckless idea. But Pappy wasn't thinking about failure. He was thinking about his wife and 4 children, trapped 1,700 miles north in a Japanese internment camp at Sto. Thomas in Manila. He was thinking about the convoy of Japanese transports he had watched slip past American forces the previous week. Impossible to stop because no aircraft could fly low enough, slow enough, and hit hard enough to stop them. He was thinking about transforming a medium bomber, designed to drop ordnance from 12,000 feet, into something the Japanese had never seen. A low-level strafing monster capable of shredding ships, suppressing anti-aircraft fire, and turning enemy airfields into graveyards. This is not a story of advanced technology solving a military problem. This is the story of a blacksmith's son from Arkansas who, armed with nothing but wrecked fighter planes, hand tools, and a desperate need to end a war that held his family hostage, turned America's medium bombers into the most feared gunships in the Pacific. It is a story of improvisation triumphing over engineering, of necessity mothering an invention that would define close air support for generations. And it is the story of one man's fury transforming aluminum and guns into a weapon that would help shatter the Japanese Empire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from today. The North American B-25 Mitchell bomber was never meant to be a gunship. When it rolled off the production line at the North American Aviation Plant in Englewood, California in 1941, it was designed as a medium bomber, a workhorse aircraft meant to deliver substantial bomb loads economically and accurately from moderate altitudes between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. It had twin R-2600 engines, measured 64 feet from nose to tail, spanned 95 feet in wingspan, and had a loaded weight of 33,000 pounds. Its maximum speed was 230 miles per hour, with a range of 1,300 miles. The Mitchell was a solid, reliable aircraft, named after Brigadier General William "Billy" Mitchell, the charismatic air power prophet who had proven in 1921 that planes could sink battleships. It carried a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier/navigator, radio operator, and 2 gunners. Defensive armament included a tail gun, a dorsal turret, and a ventral gun tray, which took almost a minute to extend, by which time a Zero fighter could make 3 attack passes. These defensive guns often posed as much danger to the Mitchell's own vertical tails and engine nacelles as to enemy fighters. The aircraft was thoroughly conventional, thoroughly tested, and thoroughly inadequate for the war being fought in the Southwest Pacific in 1942. In the jungles and islands of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, altitude was a luxury American bomber crews could rarely afford. Medium-level bombing was often ineffective. Flying at 10,000 feet, a bombardier might spot a ship, airfield, or supply dump, but actually hitting it through dense jungle canopy, under anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters, was another matter entirely. Bombs dropped from high altitudes scattered widely. Many disappeared into the jungle without detonating. Others splashed harmlessly into water. The few that did strike targets often caused minimal damage, failing to hit the vulnerable points that mattered most. Meanwhile, Japanese supply convoys ran nightly, sustaining isolated garrisons, reinforcing threatened positions, and delivering troops and equipment across their vast Pacific empire. American submarines were taking a toll, but submarines couldn't be everywhere. The U.S. Army Air Forces needed a way to strike these convoys from the air, to deny the Japanese the freedom of movement that geography seemed to grant them. They needed aircraft that could fly low, loiter over targets, suppress defensive fire, and deliver devastating attacks against ships and shore installations. The problem was that no such aircraft existed in the American inventory in mid-1942. Fighters like the P-40 Warhawk and P-39 Airacobra had the speed and maneuverability for low-level attacks, but they lacked the range, the firepower, and the survivability to sustain operations against well-defended targets. Heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress were designed for high-altitude strategic bombing, not low-level ship-busting. Light bombers like the Douglas A-20 Havoc showed promise, but they were in short supply. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber was available in increasing numbers, but it had been designed for a completely different mission profile. What the 5th Air Force needed was an aircraft that combined the range and payload of a medium bomber with the forward-firing punch of a fighter. They needed something that could approach targets at wavetop height, suppress anti-aircraft fire with streams of heavy machine gun fire, and then either strafe the target to pieces or skip bomb it with 500-pound bombs released so low they bounced across the water like stones before slamming into the hulls of ships below the waterline. They needed a gunship, and they needed it in weeks, not months, not years. Every week of delay meant more Japanese supply runs, more reinforced positions, and more dead American and Australian soldiers on jungle battlefields where air support could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Enter Major General George C. Kenney, who arrived in Australia in August 1942 to take command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific Theater. Kenney was 53 years old, a veteran of the First World War, and a man with no patience for orthodoxy when orthodoxy was getting his men killed. He immediately began touring his scattered bases, searching for solutions to the tactical problems that were bleeding his bomber force white. At Charter Towers Airfield, south of Townsville in Queensland, he found something interesting. A greased-up former Navy pilot in his early 40s working in a shelter on a Douglas A-20 Havoc, converting it from a light bomber into something else entirely. Paul Irvin Gunn, called Pappy by everyone who knew him, because at 43 he was ancient by Air Force standards, was unlike any officer Kenney had ever met. Gunn had enlisted in the Navy in 1918, served 21 years as an aviation mechanic, and then a naval aviation pilot, and retired in December 1939 as a chief petty officer. He was an expert in low-level flying, a gifted aircraft mechanic, and a man who understood airplanes the way a blacksmith understands iron, because he could shape them with his hands. After leaving the Navy, Gunn had moved his family to the Philippines, where he helped start Philippine Airlines, flying 5 privately owned Beechcraft aircraft on cargo and passenger routes across the islands. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Gunn was in Manila. Major General Louis Brereton, commander of the Far East Air Force, immediately commandeered Philippine Airlines aircraft and personnel. Gunn was sworn into the Army Air Forces as a captain, given command of a makeshift air transport squadron, and ordered to evacuate military personnel from Japanese-held territory. For the next 6 weeks, Gunn flew mission after mission into hostile airspace in unarmored Beechcraft planes, bringing out pilots, ferrying supplies to besieged troops on Bataan, and performing feats of low-level flying that earned him a reputation as either the bravest or the craziest pilot in the Philippines. He survived being shot down once, crashing into a coconut plantation, and being rescued by the plantation owner, someone he had flown as a passenger during peacetime. Eventually, in late January 1942, Gunn flew one of the last aircraft out of the Philippines to Australia, carrying key personnel to safety. But he left something behind: his wife, Clara Louise, and their 4 children, Nathaniel, Connie, Julie, and Paul Jr., trapped in Manila when the city fell. On January 20, 1942, the Japanese rounded up American and Allied civilians and interned them at the University of Sto. Thomas. Pappy Gunn's family would remain prisoners there for 3 years, living on starvation rations, subjected to brutal discipline, slowly wasting away while he fought from Australia. Unable to reach them, unable to protect them, able only to kill as many Japanese as possible in the desperate hope that ending the war faster might save their lives. This was the man General Kenney found working on an A-20 in a tin shelter at Charter Towers in August 1942. This was the man who, when asked what he was doing, explained that he was installing 4.50 caliber machine guns into the bombardier's nose, replacing the transparent plexiglass with solid metal, and transforming the light bomber into a low-level strafer that could suppress anti-aircraft fire and tear enemy aircraft and installations to pieces. Kenney asked where Gunn had gotten the machine guns. Gunn explained that he was scavenging them from wrecked fighters scattered across Australian airfields. P-40 Warhawks and P-39 Airacobras damaged beyond repair but with functional weapons. The 5th Air Force supply of .50 caliber machine guns was severely limited throughout the Southwest Pacific. There were never enough. So Gunn did what any good mechanic does. He improvised. He found wrecks. He salvaged guns. He fabricated mounts. He tested, adjusted, and tested again. He made it work because making it work was the only option. General Kenny was impressed. This old sailor understood something that headquarters staff in comfortable offices never would. That war is not won by following procedures, but by solving problems, and that the best solutions often come from people who know their tools intimately enough to bend them to new purposes. Kenny immediately placed Gunn on his personal staff as a special projects officer and gave him a simple mandate. Convert more aircraft, make them deadlier, and do it fast. Gunn set to work with a fury that astonished everyone around him. He wasn't just an engineer solving a technical problem. He was a father trying to save his family by shortening a war. Every aircraft he modified, every sortie that aircraft flew, every Japanese ship sunk or airfield destroyed brought the war closer to Manila, closer to Sto. Thomas, closer to his wife and children. Fury is a powerful motivator. Desperation is an even stronger engineer. By early September 1942, Gunn had converted several A-20s into strafers. The modifications were crude but effective. 4.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted in the nose. Solid metal panels replacing the bombardier's transparent station. Additional ammunition storage. Bomb racks adapted to carry parachute fragmentation bombs. Small explosives slowed by parachutes so the attacking aircraft could escape the blast radius even at ultra-low altitude. The parafrag bombs drifted gently down over enemy airfields and installations, detonating above parked aircraft and fuel dumps, showering them with red-hot fragments and white phosphorus that ignited everything the fragments touched. The converted A-20s were tested in combat on September 12, 1942, during a raid on the Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. The results exceeded every expectation. Flying at wavetop height and treetop level, the strafers roared in before defenders could react, suppressing anti-aircraft fire with streams of .50 caliber armor-piercing rounds, then releasing their parafrag bombs directly over the target. Japanese fighters caught on the ground exploded. Fuel dumps blew apart. Buildings disintegrated. The lightly built Japanese aircraft, designed for agility and range, not armor, tore apart under the half-inch bullets traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The strafers pulled up and away, leaving behind a trail of destruction that looked like the wrath of an angry god. General Kenny immediately ordered Gunn to do the same thing to the B-25 Mitchell. This was a bigger challenge. The A-20 was a light bomber, relatively small and relatively easy to modify. The B-25 was a medium bomber, larger, more complex, with different aerodynamics and structural considerations. Adding weight to the nose of an aircraft affected its center of gravity, which influenced stability and handling. Installing guns created recoil forces that had to be absorbed by the airframe. Turning a bomber designed for high-altitude level flight into a low-level strafer meant accepting risks no engineer at North American Aviation would ever have approved. But Pappy Gunn didn't work for North American Aviation. He worked for General Kenny. And General Kenny didn't care what the manual said was possible. He cared about what needed to be done. Gunn was assisted by Jack Fox, a North American Aviation technical representative stationed at Charter Towers. Fox sent drawings of Gunn's proposed modifications back to the factory in Long Beach, California, but too few B-25s were available in the theater to spare any for modification experiments. The first B-25s were required for conventional bombing missions. Gunn would have to wait for more aircraft to arrive before he could begin the conversions that would define the rest of the Pacific Air War. The waiting was agony. Every day meant more supply runs, more reinforcements, more American soldiers dying on jungle battlefields, more time his family remained in that internment camp. Gunn flew combat missions himself, testing his A-20 conversions, refining tactics, and proving the concept. He flew more missions than almost any other man in theater, accumulating combat hours and enemy kills, earning 2 distinguished flying crosses, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, and eventually 9 Purple Hearts, 9 separate wounds. 9 times he bled in combat and kept flying. By late 1942, B-25 Mitchells were arriving in Australia in greater numbers. General Kenny authorized Gunn to begin the conversion program. Working with a small team of mechanics, Gunn set up a B-25 conversion center at Townsville. The modifications were extensive. Remove the transparent bombardier's nose. Replace it with solid metal panels. Install 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in the nose, 4 in underwing blisters or fuselage packages. Some aircraft received even more guns. 2 additional forward-firing guns in cheek blisters on either side of the nose, bringing total forward-firing armament to 10 or even 12 heavy machine guns. Add the dorsal turret's 2 guns, which could be synchronized to fire forward with the fixed guns, and some B-25s could bring 14.50 caliber machine guns to bear on a target at once. 14.50 caliber machine guns. Each gun firing 850 rounds per minute. Each round a half-inch diameter armor-piercing projectile traveling at 2,900 feet per second. 14 guns meant 11,900 rounds per minute, nearly 200 rounds per second, forming a cone of destruction so dense that anything caught inside it simply disintegrated. The conversions took time, weeks, not overnight. Not a single desperate night of improvisation, but a sustained program of modification and testing. Each aircraft had to be carefully altered to preserve structural integrity. The guns had to be aligned, tested, adjusted. Ammunition feed systems had to be installed and debugged. Pilots had to learn new tactics for an aircraft that now handled differently, carried more weight in the nose, and required new flying techniques to manage the mass of guns and ammunition. But when the results arrived, they were devastating. The first squadron of Strafer B-25s was ready for combat in early 1943. They would prove their worth in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea. One of the most one-sided victories in the history of naval aviation. A battle that would demonstrate beyond any doubt that Pappy Gunn's jury-rigged gunships had reshaped the Pacific War forever. In the first days of March 1943, intelligence reports reached General Kenny's headquarters in Port Moresby, New Guinea. A Japanese convoy is forming at Rabaul, 8 transport ships carrying nearly 7,000 troops, escorted by 8 destroyers. Destination: La, New Guinea, where Japanese forces are straining under pressure from Allied advances. The convoy represents a massive reinforcement drive, enough troops to shift the momentum of the ground campaign, and enough supplies to fuel Japanese resistance for months. General Kenny knows exactly what must be done. The convoy has to be destroyed, not damaged, not delayed, destroyed. Every ship, every soldier, every ton of supplies. Because if those 7,000 troops reach La, American and Australian soldiers will pay for it in blood on jungle battlefields where the enemy already commands every advantage terrain can offer. Kenny has the aircraft to make it happen. He has B-17 flying fortresses for high-altitude strikes. He has B-25 Mitchells, both standard bombers and Pappy guns modified strafers. He has A-20 Havocs, similarly transformed. He has P-38 Lightning fighters for escort and strafing runs. And he has a new tactic tested in smaller fights but never on a target this large, this guarded, this vital. Skip bombing. The idea is simple in theory, terrifying in practice. A bomber dives in at extremely low altitude, 200 feet or less, sometimes barely 50 feet above the waves. At point-blank range, maybe a quarter mile from the ship, the bomber releases its bombs with a slight upward angle. The bombs skip across the water like flat pebbles tossed by children at a lakeshore. Except these pebbles weigh 500 pounds and carry high explosives. They skip once, twice, then smash into a ship's hull at or below the waterline, exactly where naval architects know a vessel is most vulnerable. The blast tears open the hull. The sea rushes in. The ship sinks. But skip bombing demands pilots to charge straight at heavily armed warships through walls of anti-aircraft fire. Low enough that one misjudgment means hitting the water and disintegrating. Slow enough that enemy gunners can track and fire. Close enough that if a bomb detonates early, the attacking plane may be caught in its own explosion. It demands ice-cold nerves and flawless timing. It demands aircraft that can smother anti-aircraft guns long enough for the bombers to release and escape. It demands Pappy Gunn's Strafer B-25s. If you find this story compelling, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea begins on March 2, 1943. The Japanese convoy leaves Rabaul, steaming southwest through the Solomon Sea toward the Huon Gulf and Lae. Australian reconnaissance planes locate the convoy and trail it, transmitting course and position. General Kenny mobilizes his air groups. Bombers and fighters launch from bases scattered across New Guinea and northern Australia. The weather is dreadful. Heavy clouds, driving rain, poor visibility, but the conditions favor the Allies, allowing the approaching aircraft to remain unseen until the final moment. The opening strikes are conventional. B-17 Flying Fortresses bomb from altitude on March 2nd and 3rd, landing few hits but forcing the convoy to weave constantly, slowing its advance. Then the skies clear on the morning of March 3rd, and Kenny unleashes the strafers. The modified B-25S and A-20S roar in low, so low their propellers throw up curtains of spray from the wave tops. They come in formation, a wall of aircraft charging the convoy at 200 miles per hour. The Japanese ships spot them. Anti-aircraft guns erupt. 20mm and 25mm cannons fill the air with bursts of explosive fire. Heavier 40mm guns arc shells through the sky. The air becomes a storm of tracers, black bursts, smoke, fury. Desperate defense writ large. And then the strafers return fire. 14.50 caliber machine guns per plane. Multiple aircraft striking at once. Thousands of rounds each second tearing into Japanese vessels. The impact is apocalyptic. Anti-aircraft crews are cut down where they stand. Gun shields are punched through like tin. Bridge glass disappears in shards. Superstructures disintegrate. Armor-piercing rounds rip through plating, ricochet through compartments, obliterate wooden sections, ignite fires, detonate ammunition. The Japanese gunners who survive the initial storm find themselves pinned down, unable to aim, unable to fire, forced into cover as .50 caliber rounds pulverize everything around them. And in that precious window of suppressed fire, the skip-bombing B-25S and conventional Mitchells drop their payloads. 500-pound bombs skip across the surface. Some miss. War is never tidy, but many connect. They strike hulls below the waterline. They detonate with the force of half a ton of concentrated explosive ripping into the ship's weakest structural point. Steel bends. Welds burst. The ocean surges in. The transport ships, heavily crowded with troops and supplies, are especially exposed. They are not warships. They lack armored hulls or advanced damage control systems. When the bombs strike, when the hulls split open to the Pacific, they begin sinking almost instantly. Troops below decks, trapped in fast-flooding compartments, have no escape. The ships sink lower, list sharply, then roll over or break apart and vanish beneath the waves. The destroyers endure longer. They are warships, built to take punishment, but even they cannot survive the coordinated assault. One destroyer receives a bomb amidships and snaps in two. Another is so shredded by .50 caliber fire that it loses control, circling helplessly as fires burn unchecked. A third, attempting to rescue survivors from a sinking transport, is caught by strafers and turned into a floating funeral pyre. The battle rages for 3 days. Each time the Japanese attempt rescues, Allied aircraft descend. Each time a damaged vessel tries to escape, it is hit again. The Strafer B-25s hunt like wolves, operating in concert with conventional bombers, with fighters, with reconnaissance planes marking targets. They employ the new parachute fragmentation bombs, drifting them down onto destroyer decks, killing exposed sailors, igniting fires, generating confusion. They strafe lifeboats and debris fields, not from cruelty, but because those survivors are soldiers who, if saved, will return to fight on New Guinea's brutal terrain. By March 4th, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea has ended. The results are overwhelming. All 8 transport ships sunk, 4 destroyers sunk, 3 more severely damaged. Roughly 3,000 Japanese troops die in the sinking ships or in the water. Fewer than 1,000 reach shore, and most are immediately captured or killed by Allied forces. The reinforcement mission is obliterated. The supplies intended to sustain the Japanese garrison at La for months now lie at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Allied losses. For aircraft shot down, 13 aircrew killed or missing. It stands as one of the most lopsided victories in the annals of warfare. And at the heart of it, making it feasible, are Pappy Gunn's altered B-25s. The strafers that smothered defensive fire, enabled the skip bombers to close in, and ripped Japanese vessels apart with focused machine gun bursts. General Kenny immediately orders additional conversions. Word spreads across the theater. Other air forces want the strafers. The 13th Air Force sends B-25s to Brisbane for conversion. Depot engineers at Townsville begin modifying aircraft. The 10th Air Force in India adopts the innovations. What started as one man's desperate improvisation in a tin hangar in Queensland becomes standard practice across the Pacific. But the story does not end with battlefield triumph, because North American aviation in California has been observing. Factory representatives have been forwarding reports about Gunn's modifications. Engineers in Long Beach have been analyzing the outcomes and begin integrating Gunn's ideas into new production models. In late 1943, North American unveils the B-25G model. The transparent nose is removed, replaced with a solid metal nose housing a 75mm M4 cannon. A tank gun fitted to an aircraft, launching 3-pound explosive shells that can strike ships from 2 miles away and sink smaller vessels with a lone hit. 4.50 caliber machine guns augment the cannon. The idea is daring. The execution is troublesome. The 75mm cannon generates massive recoil. Every shot makes the entire plane shudder. Pilots struggle to keep the aircraft steady. The cannon must be loaded manually, is slow to ready, and rapidly empties its limited ammunition. After 7 weeks of combat, squadrons flying the B-25G exhaust all their 75mm shells. The cannon-armed Mitchells are an intriguing experiment, but in the end, they prove less effective than Pappy Gunn's simpler strategy. More machine guns. The B-25H model follows 1,000 aircraft built with even greater firepower. The 75mm cannon is swapped for a lighter one. 14 guns line the frame, 8 in the nose, for inside blisters, 2 in the dorsal turret. Some H models also carry rockets, 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets that can be launched in devastating salvos. But the fullest realization of Pappy Gunn's vision emerges with the B-25J, introduced in 1944. North American builds more than 4,000 J models. Many roll out with transparent noses for standard bombing, but the depot system produces conversion kits, the strafer nose option. Once converted, a J model carries 18.50 caliber machine guns. 8 in the nose, 4 in fuselage packages, 2 in the dorsal turret, 1 in each waist position and 2 in the tail. 14 of those 18 guns fire straight ahead. 18.50 caliber guns on one aircraft. A combined firing rate of 15,300 rounds per minute, more than 250 rounds per second. A B-25J strafer firing all forward guns at once unleashes more lead than an entire infantry company could fire with their rifles. The impact on targets is not mere destruction, it is disintegration. These heavily armed Mitchells continue to smash Japanese targets across New Guinea, the Philippines, and Okinawa until the war's end. They strafe airfields, obliterating parked aircraft. They strike bridges, severing vital supply lines. They hunt coastal barges and small vessels. They provide ground troops with devastating close air support. They are so effective that captured enemy documents warn Japanese forces not to engage when the strafers are overhead. Ordinary weapons are useless against them, and attacking only enrages the monsters. The strafer crews develop their own tactics and earn their own fearsome reputation. They fly low enough to read the expressions on enemy soldiers' faces. They approach from unexpected angles, over mountains, up valleys, along coastlines, using terrain to mask their advance until the final moment. They operate in coordination. One aircraft lays down suppressive fire while another delivers the killing strike. They are feared. They are hated. They are merciless. And behind every one of those aircraft is Pappy Gunn's desperate fury, shaped into engineering, transformed into lethal force. Major Gunn is promoted for his innovations, and his combat record eventually brings him back to the United States to oversee factory production of the new B-25 variants at North American Aviation. It is recognition of his contributions, an acknowledgement that his field modifications have been so successful they must be incorporated into production aircraft. But Gunn does not seek recognition. He wants to be in the Pacific, fighting, killing Japanese, shortening the war that holds his family hostage. He returns to the Pacific as soon as he can. He continues flying combat missions. He continues taking risks that make his commanders uneasy. In late 1944, a Japanese bombing raid on Leyte in the Philippines catches him on the ground. He is wounded, his 9th Purple Heart, badly enough to be removed from active combat. The war continues without him. But by then, the strafer program he pioneered is so fully integrated into Pacific operations that it no longer needs him. In February 1945, American forces liberate Manila. They fight house to house, building to building, against fanatical Japanese defenders who would rather die than surrender. On February 3rd, American troops reach the University of Sto. Tomas. They find over 3,000 internees, starving, sick, traumatized by 3 years of captivity. Among them are Clara Louise Gunn and her 4 children. Pappy Gunn is reunited with his family. They are alive, barely malnourished, traumatized, forever marked by their ordeal, but alive. The war he fought to shorten, the modifications he made, the missions he flew, the Japanese he killed, all of it was for this moment. His family survives. The Philippines are liberated. The war presses toward its conclusion. Gunn retires from the Army Air Forces as a full colonel on June 30, 1948. Medically retired due to accumulated wounds, he returns to the Philippines to rebuild Philippine Airlines, the airline he helped launch before the war. The company expands, offering flights across the South Pacific, becoming one of the region's major carriers. Gunn flies again, not in combat, but in commerce, carrying passengers and cargo instead of guns and fury. On October 11, 1957, Colonel Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn dies when his chartered Beech 18 crashes in a storm over the Philippines. He is 57 years old. He survived 21 years in the Navy, 5 years of brutal Pacific combat, 9 combat wounds, countless near misses, and the loss of nearly everything he loved while his family was imprisoned. A storm over the islands he cherished finally claims him. But his legacy endures. The strafer concept he pioneered does not die with him. During the Korean War, modified B-25s provide close air support using the same tactics Gunn developed. Heavy forward-firing armament on a stable platform becomes doctrine. In the 1960s, as the United States develops gunships for Vietnam, engineers study Pappy Gunn's work. They understand his insight that sometimes the best weapon is not the newest, nor the most technologically advanced, but the one that puts maximum firepower exactly where it is needed. The AC-47 Spooky, the first modern gunship, employs sideways-firing guns and a pylon turn, a different approach than Gunn's forward-firing strafers, but shares the same principle, converting transport and bomber aircraft into devastating gunships. The AC-130 Spectre, still flying today with 105mm howitzers and sophisticated targeting systems, is a direct descendant of Gunn's vision. Take an aircraft designed for one purpose, modify it for another, and create a weapon so effective it alters how wars are fought. Every Air Force close air support doctrine written since the 1940s implicitly or explicitly acknowledges that Pappy Gunn was right, that desperation produces innovation, that field modifications can outpace factory design, that the side willing to improvise, break rules, and transform its tools into unprecedented weapons gains an advantage technology alone cannot provide. The irony is profound and multi-layered. A bomber designed for medium-altitude bombing becomes a low-level strafer. A former Navy pilot, retired and running a civilian airline, becomes one of the most innovative weapons designers of the war. An aircraft modification program born from desperation and scavenged parts becomes the foundation for gunship doctrine for 80 years. A man fighting to save his family helps destroy an empire. And perhaps the deepest irony, the B-25 Mitchell, which Pappy Gunn modified so radically, was never meant to be a close air support aircraft. It was intended to drop bombs from medium altitude. It was meant to be safe, orthodox, conventional. But orthodoxy does not win wars. Innovation does. Desperation does. fury channeled into engineering. The morning of September 12, 1942, Pappy guns modified A-20 attacked Buna. The raid succeeded beyond all expectations. But Gunn wasn't celebrating. He was already planning. The next modification, the next improvement, the next innovation. Because every day the war continued was another day his family spent in that camp. Every sortie his aircraft flew, every enemy position his modifications destroyed, brought the end closer. War is often portrayed as a story of grand strategy, of decisive battles, of great commanders moving armies like pieces on a chessboard. But wars are also won in tin hangars in the Australian heat. By middle-aged former sailors with grease under their fingernails and fury in their hearts. By men who understand that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is simply being willing to look at an aircraft, a perfectly good conventional orthodox aircraft, and ask, what if we added more guns? Pappy Gunn asked that question. He answered it with a wrench and a welding torch. And the Japanese Empire paid the price in blood and steel at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. The B-25 Mitchell flew in every theater of the Second World War. It participated in the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. It bombed targets across Europe, Africa, and Asia. It served with distinction in dozens of air forces around the world. Nearly 10,000 were built. It was reliable. It was versatile. It was loved by its crews. But in the Southwest Pacific, the Mitchell was something more. It was a gunship. It was a ship killer. It was a terror weapon that forced the Japanese to abandon daylight supply runs, to scatter their convoys, to accept that American air power could reach them anywhere, anytime, and turn their ships into funeral pyres. And all of it, the tactics, the modifications, the victories, traces back to one man who refused to accept that his family's imprisonment was inevitable, who refused to accept that the war would last as long as orthodox thinking suggested, who refused to accept that aircraft had to be used the way their designers intended. Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn didn't invent the gunship overnight in a moment of desperate improvisation. He developed it over months of trial and error, testing and refinement, combat experience and engineering insight. But he did it faster than any official program could have. He did it with salvaged parts and improvised solutions. He did it because he had to, because every delay meant his family suffered. Because fury is a powerful engineer when channeled through skill and determination. The Strafer B-25s weren't perfect. They were nose-heavy. They handled differently than conventional Mitchells. The recoil from firing all those guns simultaneously was violent enough to slow the aircraft noticeably. Ammunition consumption was enormous. A Strafer could expend its entire load in seconds of sustained fire. The aircraft were vulnerable to ground fire because they flew so low. Crews died. Aircraft were lost. War is never clean, never easy, never without cost. But the Strafers worked. They changed the Pacific War. They allowed American forces to interdict Japanese supply lines, to support ground troops with devastating precision, and to destroy enemy installations before defenders could respond. They saved lives, American, Australian, and Allied, by shortening battles, by preventing reinforcements from reaching embattled garrisons, by giving ground forces the air support they desperately needed. And every time a Strafer B-25 dove toward a Japanese ship or airfield, every time those 14 machine guns opened fire and the target disintegrated under concentrated fire, it was Pappy Gunn's fury made manifest. It was a father's desperation transformed into engineering. It was improvisation defeating orthodoxy. It was proof that sometimes the best solutions come not from careful planning but from having no other choice. The Pacific War ended on August 15, 1945, with Japan's surrender. Pappy Gunn's family was free. The Strafer B-25s had helped bring that moment closer. How much closer? Impossible to calculate. But every ship sunk, every airfield destroyed, every battle shortened contributed to the cumulative pressure that forced Japan to accept the unacceptable. Wars are won by many factors: strategy, logistics, industrial production, courage, sacrifice. But they're also won by individuals who see problems and solve them, who refuse to accept limitations, who transform ordinary tools into extraordinary weapons. Pappy Gunn was such an individual. His contribution to victory wasn't a single decisive battle. It was hundreds of modifications, thousands of sorties, tens of thousands of enemy casualties inflicted by aircraft. He transformed. The B-25 Mitchell bomber was a good aircraft. Pappy Gunn made it a great one, not by sophisticated engineering or advanced technology, but by asking a simple question: what does this aircraft need to do the job that needs doing? The answer was more guns. More forward-firing, heavy machine guns capable of suppressing enemy fire and destroying targets with overwhelming firepower. So he added more guns. He added them with wrenches and welding torches, with salvaged parts and improvised mounts, with ingenuity born of desperation and refined through combat experience. And the result changed warfare. 80 years later, the United States Air Force still operates gunships based on principles Pappy Gunn pioneered. The platforms are different, turboprop transports instead of piston-engine bombers. The weapons are more sophisticated: cannons, howitzers, precision-guided munitions. The targeting systems use radar, infrared sensors, and computers that would have seemed like magic to Gunn's generation. But the fundamental insight remains unchanged. A transport or bomber aircraft properly modified can deliver sustained, devastating firepower against ground targets with a precision and intensity that other platforms cannot match. Every AC-130 gunship pilot owes a debt to Pappy Gunn. Every close air support controller calling in fire from circling gunships is using tactics refined in the skies over New Guinea and the Bismarck Sea. Every innovation in aerial gunnery stands on foundations Gunn laid in a tin hangar in Queensland, working with hand tools and fury. This is not the story of advanced technology defeating primitive enemy equipment. The Japanese were not unsophisticated. Their aircraft were excellent. Their ships were well armed. Their pilots were skilled and courageous. They understood warfare as well as anyone. But they didn't have Pappy Gunn. They didn't have a blacksmith's son from Arkansas who understood aircraft intimately enough to transform them, who was desperate enough to try unconventional solutions, who was furious enough to work 18-hour days modifying bombers because every hour of delay was an hour his family spent in captivity. The Japanese fought bravely. They fought skillfully. They fought with everything they had. But they couldn't adapt as fast as Gunn could innovate. They couldn't counter tactics they'd never seen before. And when those Strafer B-25s came in at wave-top height, guns blazing, bombs skipping across the water toward their hulls, all the courage and skill in the world couldn't save them. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now. And don't forget to subscribe.